Deputy McAuliffe, you, I suppose, talked about the Fianna Fáil approach to housing, and I suppose I grew up outside a town which very much benefited from that Fianna Fáil approach to housing. There were two council estates. They were called estates then, not developments, but same difference, But they were very mixed. Practically a large cross-section of society could live in those. And I think the whole society benefited from it. It enabled people to get housing, it enabled people to stay at home. There was also a factory that was there that's since closed down. But, unlike many parts of rural Ireland, it wasn't ravaged by immigration to the same extent. I mean, there was a lot of immigration, but it wasn't quite as bad as other areas. And I think a small part of that was perhaps the fact that there was those estates. So what you did forget to say was, of course, that those estates had to be built by Fianna Fáil builders, but that's another matter. I mean, it's just as a matter of fact, they were, and they were generally across Clare, but I suppose Clare was perceived to be a De Valera's county, a Fianna Fáil county, so I suppose how could you possibly hope to build houses in a Fianna Fáil county if you weren't a Fianna Fáil builder? But that's an aside. I want to focus on the present, and I don't want to be churlish, there was a huge societal benefit, but that approach has changed, not necessarily by Fianna Fáil, but I don't think what you're heralding at the moment is quite the return to those glory days of the past. Because, like in Clare at the moment, the threshold is €35,000, which means essentially, if I'm not mistaken, that for a two-adult, two-children family, that means that the income threshold is €38,500 to qualify for social housing now. Now, that's an improvement, and I welcome every single improvement, and I appreciate that improvements are difficult, and it is particularly difficult in the field of housing. But €38,500 is still substantially less than the average industrial wage at €45,000. Now, one of the things that I mentioned is there was a factory in Scariff, and people who worked in that factory could get a house in that estate and live there. Other people who couldn't work couldn't get a job in that factory, perhaps at times couldn't get a job anywhere, could also get a house in that estate, but it was mixed, whereas that's not the case now. I mean, that factory isn't there, but if it was, it would be, most factories are paying close enough to an average industrial wage. So we're not really returning to those days. In fact, at that threshold, if you had a couple, both of whom were on the average, on the minimum wage, a husband and wife, they needn't be married, or they needn't be a male-female relationship. Take your pick, but two people in a relationship with children on the minimum wage, and they don't qualify for social housing now in Ireland. And I really think that, yes, I welcome what the Minister has done, but in terms of describing it as brave, it's maybe just a little bit too much. I mean, I think we should hold off on any plans to take down any of the bronzes around here and put the Minister up instead. But it is welcome. It is welcome, but it's not the stuff that revolutions are made of. Hopefully we can go further in the lifetime of this government. And I do appreciate that the Minister is moving in the right direction. I appreciate that you from the government backbenchers, and it's not easy to be a government backbencher. I was a government backbencher too once, albeit at a time when there wasn't very much money available, and hopefully that time won't return in the lifetime of this government. But so look, to say that I welcome it, I do, but we've a long, long, long way to go in terms of really returning to the days of social housing in Ireland, when there was a huge amount of houses being built, regardless of who was building them. I don't care who was building them, how the builders were selected. There was a huge amount of social housing built. I acknowledge that it was built largely by Fianna Fáil governments, but that doesn't change the fact that Fianna Fáil are in government now. There is a housing crisis. Nobody's expecting everybody to be able to turn it around in 24 months. But I think we've a lot further to go in terms of the limits of social housing before we can say that we have a genuinely inclusive social housing policy in this state again. Thank you for the time, Count Corley.